Hello, everyone. Welcome to Leadership Lessons from Across the Pond with myself, Julian Roberts, and my co-host, Nancy Halpern. This is our first episode, so we just want to let you know what the purpose of this series is. Nancy and I will be tackling key leadership challenges on a weekly basis. And these could be current to the context we're in right now, or they could be challenges that are more evergreen throughout sort of leadership. And we wanted to share our two very different perspectives on solving these leadership challenges. And I want to encourage you to really join in the conversation and let us know where you are and if any questions you may have. And we'll endeavor to try and answer those questions if we get time. So today's challenge, and it's very relevant in our time that we're living in right now. And it's all about performance reviews. How do we deliver them not only effectively remotely, but in a context of the last 12 months of COVID-19? Has the criteria for great performance changed? And how do you observe people's reactions if you're not in the same room? So Nancy, what are your considerations on all this?
Well, Julian, that's not fair. Those are stacking questions. You asked three of them. That's really way too hard to answer. But when I was thinking about these questions, what came to my mind was anxiety and how we, even though performance reviews happen every year, no matter what job you're in or what company you're at or what industry is yours, they come every year, and yet you're anxious about them every year. And so especially this year when there's a lot of free-floating anxiety about COVID and our economies, how can you dial it down? So one thing that I thought of is that as a leader, invite your people during the performance review to talk about accomplishments outside of the regular metrics. How did they do this year? What do they feel good about? And it might be something just like, I learned how to homeschool, or I managed to keep my team engaged with nobody falling off the cliff. But I think that kind of conversation makes a connection that's more difficult to make remotely. It also reminds your people about you as a leader, caring about being a human leader. So I think that's a new kind of flavor or dimension that would really help. What do you think about that?
No, I really like that. And it's interesting because I'd have thought, actually, we need to think differently in how we evaluate people in the last 12 months, in terms of those metrics that we all get given, the KPIs, the SMART objectives, all very numbers. And that's fine. But, 12 months ago was fine. But COVID has just literally wipe them and change the goalposts. And I think we need to think differently. And like you were saying, I think a bit broader. You're thinking more about outside of work. I was thinking more about how we could think about how people, as growth and learning has sort of changed over the last 12 months, and not be so transactional. And this is quite difficult to measure. But some of the things I was thinking about how can you, whether somebody's empathy has increased, or the resilience, or the capacity to adapt, or you've seen them be more supportive of others and team working, and start to look at broader ways of evaluating them as opposed to just on the sort of they've hit some numbers.
I think actually you and I are on the same plane on this, which is surprising, but I'm not as much focused on maybe what they did personally, although that's good to fold in if it's appropriate, but also you say, did they develop someone on their team? Did they add something that wasn't in one of those boxes? Because I think one of the things people hate about their performance reviews is that it feels sort of like a bureaucratic exercise that they just have to get through. But, what if it really were a conversation about qualities and about what's happened during this time on the team, or maybe about your own leadership? The other thing that I was thinking about is that performance reviews really have these two halves, right? There's the past, the year that we just finished, and there's the future. And usually they're very weighted to the past. But what if this year, to deliver them more effectively, you spent a good chunk of the time talking about the future? And as the leader, if you can engage your person actually in what your own goals are and how their objectives and goals overlap with your objectives and goals, And that actually helps the organization as a whole. Because I'm not sure that leaders typically make it clear how much their own success is dependent upon their people's success and vice versa. So I'd like to see in the performance reviews this year that are really done well, more of that kind of partnership in the future casting.
Yes. No, I agree. And I think it is that partnership where you're trying to, I suppose the intent really with a performance review is not about judging somebody and saying where you've gone wrong and you're not very good at this or you didn't hit that. It is about the future. It is about how can I help you become better? How can I help you become a greater performer? And by you becoming a great performer in my team performs better, our organizations perform better. And I think you're right. I think that the focus, and I know I was in one organization where they got it down to almost one page as opposed to reams of pages to make it less anxious as well, to make it a little bit more concise. And I think we got to a place where the top third was historical, as in review of the last year, and the bottom 2/3, which I think gives the sort of mindset of approach, was what are the goals, development goals, what are the training, whatever the future. And I think that focus tilt needs to be brought in. So how do you think, in terms of just going back to that whole piece on looking at the wider piece of measuring people outside of work or measuring resilience, how might we do that, do you think? I mean, they're quite, I'll say we're fluffy, but they're quite subjective, aren't they, in terms of measures?
Yeah, that's really tough. I think we get asked these kinds of questions all the time. How do you measure something that isn't linked to a quantitative figure? And I think the best way is to think of it as a delta. What has changed? What has shifted?
Yes.
What's observable? What have I heard? Because those really are measurements, right? Those are metrics. How have you solved that problem for other people?
Yeah, no, I've done the same with you. I've used that view of scaling, saying to people on a scale of 1 to 10, and it may appear arbitrary, but at least if you can say where people are at and what got you to that position, what sort of evidence has got you to say that somebody capacity to change is an 8, and then you just had 2 or 3 things that say, oh well, they did this in this situation, they went home, they adapted really well, they got into developing with their clients in a remote context. So the key thing is looking for evidences, but it's a bit more, I suppose, wordy in that context. It's not a little single number, although it's good to have a number, which it might be a scale, but it's having those words of evidence. And I think that's where it becomes a really conversation, doesn't it? It becomes a real debate and a chat. And I've often had reviews of teams I've worked with and said, tell me the evidence. Not that I want you to prove it, but almost I want you to share with me, what's your evidence that you adapted, and get them to think about it as well.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair request. So I have something for you that was just brought up to me by a client these past couple of weeks. The 2 challenges. One, how much of a COVID discount is there right now in a performance review? Are we cutting people some slack given the difficulty of the year? And how do you know how much is the right amount? And the second is, what do you think, Julian, of someone who asks you to do part of the performance review outside of the system? Meaning, they want to have a serious conversation about the performance, but they don't necessarily want it all in the document. What are your thoughts about those 2 things? I have my own ideas, but I want to hear what you think.
No. I think for me, it goes back to, I think we need to evaluate different things apart from just the numbers. And I think one of the ways we can do that is making sure that these reviews are done, or the review of the review are done with team leaders. And there's elements of consistency and of approach and style, and in terms of judgment as well. Almost if I've got a team of 8 people and somebody else who's similar to me as a team leader or a leader, we review each other's and try and create this, almost highlight any blind spots, but also create a bit of a consistent message of what we're trying to do. And I think that becomes more fair rather than just being focused on just the numbers. I'm sorry, what was the last thing you shared about?
About the person, either the COVID discount or the person who wants to get feedback outside of the reported review.
Yeah, I think the COVID discount, I wouldn't call it a COVID discount. I just call it a different evaluation. That's how I would set it. It's not about, and as long as it's done, say, corporately together in the sense that we're all working the same way, and that's why reviewing each other, almost peer type of reviewing. And then in terms of outside of it, I think it's good to have those conversations outside of it. I think it's good to be healthy in terms of not everything onto a piece of paper, because it's an ongoing thing, and people perceive just a performance review as a 1 year conversation. It's not. It's an ongoing conversation. So, yeah.
Well, I have a slightly different perspective on this. It might be because I know the people involved. I think that the company announced you should be kind on the performance reviews because of COVID, but I think it depends on the intent and the historical performance of that person. You know, you have to know your people. If you know someone legitimately, yeah, you don't want to be hard on them. This year was a really tough year. But if you know the person is maybe using it as an excuse, then I think you can't always excuse a performance by something. So I think you do have to, as a leader, you have to calibrate and nuance, I think, as you would say, your feedback, right? I don't think it's sort of a blanket get out of jail free kind of card. I hope that doesn't sound too mean. But the other example, I don't really agree with you on that one, because I think it depends on intent. If the person asking you for that doesn't want critical feedback in their review, and so therefore they're hoping it's not reflected in the official document, that's, it depends on that feedback. If it's real performance feedback, no. If it's something that's highly personal, absolutely, I think we should respect people's privacy. But again, not as a way to get out of sort of dealing with difficult information in a way that's important to document.
Yeah, I suppose I'm not saying, I think if things need to be put down in terms of our performance, whether that's poor or good performance, it needs to be noted. But I think it's a consideration of empathy. And I don't put everything onto a single performance review every year. I've always said it's an ongoing conversation. We've all had those bosses where you turn up once a year and have a performance review, and you're thinking,
yeah, it's like, right.
Are you judging me?
Isn't this the same one you gave me last year? Because you were never here anyway. By the way, did I tell you that I was once hired by a very senior partner in a very big consulting company, I shall not name, to write the performance reviews for his people? Because he couldn't be bought. I didn't even know these people. He gave me their previous reviews, and he said, wow. Nancy, the reason I have to do this is I care too much about them. And it would just take me hours because I'd be so thoughtful about what I'm writing. So I need you to do it for me with no thought whatsoever, and I'll pay you. Isn't that terrible?
That is terrible. That really is terrible.
And, I thought so.
Yes, we should be continually having a challenge or an interaction with our team all the time, and so nothing becomes a surprise. Nothing's a big thing. You tackle things head on as you go with the flow and help people, support people continually. It's not a one-off performance review. It's good to document it. It really is good, and have those moments. And that I'm just thinking, just before we come into an end in a moment, what are some practical ways of doing this currently where people are remotely? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that you should try to ignore that it's remotely, if you know what I mean, because you're not in control of that. So I would try to pick a time that's good for both of you, like you usually would. I think all the same kind of rules apply. Do try to be in a very quiet space. I mean, the children and dogs are distracting, but in some ways it's kind of really rude when you're evaluating someone's performance to have that happen. So that's one thing. The second thing is, if everybody's more comfortable on the phone, it might be a good thing to do on the phone instead of having to look at each other. It would be okay to do that. If it's a really difficult review, I think it needs to be on a Zoom so you can actually see each other. Do you have any thoughts about it?
Yeah, I think that as much as I know we're all a bit Zoom fatigued, I think the Zoom thing's quite important because it really demonstrates sort of the humane side of things. I appreciate there may be moments where you just want to switch it off a little bit, perhaps, just to sort of, because it could be, hopefully not more than an hour. I don't think you need to have longer than an hour. But I think it's, well prepared. Everybody's in advance of exactly what's going on, what the expectations are, and a real opportunity for the your direct report to have a conversation and feedback themselves and not be the one just doing all the talking. I think it's really important. But yes, definitely, if you can get it into a Zoom, would be ideal. So that we are coming, as always, shooting towards the finish line here.
Yes.
Thank you for your thoughts, Nancy.
Thank you, Julian.
Yes, good debate there. And anybody else? And we've had lots of comments which we've not had a chance to even look at yet. So I appreciate everybody feeding in, and I would continue to add any questions to this feed. And we'll see you next Monday at the same time, which is 11 a.m. Eastern time and 4 p.m. UK GMT time. So we'll see you next week, and thank you very much.
And have a lovely week, everybody. Bye, Julian.
Bye, Nancy. Thanks a lot.